Part 79. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 787. Who keeps him under control and has to obey others. When Renai was full of anger at this time. She is very cute, she doesn't have much silver, but she eats very finely. If the restaurant is dirty, she would rather dry the food than eat the food in the restaurant. I have to take a shower every day, and I have to change clothes every day. He had to wash the clothes she had changed. Even the outer clothes, and her big red belly band and small lewd pants. When Renai started, her pinch of her red belly band failed to respond. Still, the handkerchief in her hand waved in front of his eyes. Nerd, it's an belly band. If you look at what it does, you can't see a flower coming, and wash it quickly to sleep. When Renai. She called him 15 at first, and later became a nerd. The name of 15 has been forgotten by the 19 clouds that she had forgotten, and now she is the word nerd in one mouth. He did not protest, even if she was washing her belly band, she could only silently vomit in the bottom of her heart. How can she let a man wash the things in her daughter's house? Is this a woman? Did you come to hook him up? Her belly band is soft and fluffy, a small piece, knead together, can pinch with one hand. He rubbed, not knowing why, and thought of hitting her chest from time to time these 2 nights. This night, when Renai was in the middle of the night, he went to wash and lay down, and by the way, washed his own lewd pants. She bought these obscene pants at his repeated requests. This one was the only one left after he washed them. The woman used to be careful with calculations, and never thought of buying clothes for him. He has no money and cannot fight for human rights. When Renai washed his obscene pants and didn't return to the carriage. There was a rustling voice in the woods. When Renai didn't move. In the past few days, he finally knew why the old man who was driving the car turned them over Huifeng Ridge and ran away. Huifengling is a watershed. Before Huifengling, almost no pirates were found. You can cross the Huifeng Ridge. You have already encountered 3 or 4 waves of robbers and gangsters who want to stop and rob. So much so that in the town, when the woman got out of the car, there was a gauze bucket that covered her knees. But the long bucket covered her face, but when she walked, she had a figure of grace, and she had her own beauty, which made her subconsciously follow her. Most of the gangsters who followed up came almost for her. What a sway master! About herself, she realized that she wouldn't get on or off the carriage in town. Although love causes trouble, it still has a little self-knowledge. This day was bright, and I don't know which robber was so diligent. Although when Renai didn't open her eyes, he squeezed the dagger she gave him into his hands. It was probably affected by her, even when the carriage was pissing, the dagger was still in the state. Boss, this is the car. There is a very beautiful big lady in the car. We have already followed the way. The last time I was injured by 2 people, the guy was a bit hard. What about a little hard work? When we get to our realm, don't even think about leaving, this man looks good, and I'll catch it for you. Low voices from those people faintly came, and when Renai's forehead was blue and leaping. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 788. Eyes squinting at the sound of the footsteps of the saring approaching the carriage, when Renai turned over and jumped out of the carriage, with the dagger in his hand and trimmed the neck of the nearest person. He moves quickly and neatly, giving no room for living. Yan Song must be there, and she will definitely find that this man's skill is much sharper than when she saw it a few times ago. This time more pirates came than before. And there were preparations, one by one throwing a fan of cigarettes and throwing a dart at Wen Renai. Probably to take Nalan Mo and the beauty in the car. But Wen Renai was too sturdy, and the people he caught were killed with blood splashing 3 feet, and there was no half dead. Although these robbers are engaged in the business of licking blood at the edge of the knife, one by one can be considered a family and a house. No one has thought about dying in this place. Wen Renai's murderous way still scared them. They fought round and round, a few dragged Wen Renai, a few sneaked closer to the carriage. Yan Ji was already awakened when fighting outside. Holding a dagger in his hand, he leaned down and squatted down in the doorway of the carriage. It didn't take long for the carriage door to be opened and he came in. I didn't want Yan Ji to think about it. I drew the dagger on the man's head and pulled it out. He grabbed the knife in the man's hand and was splashed with blood. She lifted her foot and carried the screaming man out of the carriage. Then he squeezed the big knife with both hands and stood on the symbol. Although she looks good and has a small body, she just stabbed the dagger into the man's head without hesitation. The blood splashed her all over her face. At this moment, she was standing on the cart with her hands holding her arms were still long and looked like a killer. Of course, even if Yanj looks aggressive, everyone doesn't think she can deal with it more than Wen Renai, the real killer. As soon as she showed up, everyone rushed towards her, looking for a breakthrough in her. This beautiful beauty, of course, they don't want to hurt, but can't bear the big sword of the singer, who is near to chop, who has no rules, but many people were accidentally chopped by her. This slight resistance from Yan Ji gave Wen Renai the time to approach her, and he moved faster and faster. A few steps to the carriage of Yanj, Wen Renai and her back to each other, each facing outward. Those remaining robbers were unable to capture Wen Renai and Yanj, and their eyes were stricken by Shang Wen Renai, all of them were disabled. They were intimidated and persuaded. Although they were all clamoring, they didn't dare to continue to rush up. Afterwards, they ran away in a hurry. When Renai turned around, and those people were probably very confident, so they didn't start with the sister-in-law. Fortunately, the sister-in-law didn't have any trouble. It was a problem for him and the woman to leave here in the wilderness. Realizing that she was no longer alive, when Renai came to Yan Ji and asked her, "Where can I get hurt?" Yanj still held the knife in both hands, and stood on the cheek of the car looking around with great vigilance. She did not turn back after hearing the words, "No, can't you die?" This woman. He reached out and grabbed her with the knife. "Everyone is gone." "Is it?" Even though she said so, he squeezed the handle of the big knife tightly with both hands, and he took it several times without pulling the knife out of her hand. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 789. When Renai didn't speak, pulling Yanj and sitting on the symbol in front of him. I was very patient to pinch her fingers. Before pinching, I did not forget to help her pinch her wrists and fingers to loosen her muscles. The voice in her mouth asked gently, "Afraid?" "I won't be afraid." She raised her eyebrows and raised her chin. "I have just hacked a lot of people, and they dare not approach me." The sound was not as soft as before, and the sound was tense and trembling. He squeezed her hand and praised her, "You are so good, you can pick up such a big sword." She approached him and whispered, "I have secretly played a big sword before, and I wanted to be a heroine since I was a kid." The warm breath blew into his ears, making his ears hot and his heart hot, and his voice became softer, "You are now a heroine." He opened her fingers one by one, took the big knife out of her hand, and threw it to the ground, and continued to rub her fingers that were still scratching. "You are also very good." She praised him with courtesy, "I haven't left me in this kind of thing, and I'm a bad person with discipline." When Renai was amused by her words, "I can't do without it. You have fed me poison. I will be dead if I run away. At least I can live." She also laughed, "Yes, your life is now tied to my life. I die, you are so smart." He looked at her pretending to be serious and calm, but he didn't know why, but his heart was not happy. This little woman. Two people simply rinsed off by the stream and started on the road. There were dead bodies all around, and it was scary to stay here to infiltrate people, mainly because they were afraid to find helpers again. When Renai rushed to the car, the woman sat next to him and clutched at his ragged rag. The white blouse had blood on it, and it couldn't be cleaned, and the clothes were torn during the fight last night, and now he couldn't bear to look at himself. It seems to be worse than even a beggar. After walking for a long time, I found a flat ground beside the stream. When Renai stopped the carriage, and then asked her song, "Do you have a wound on your body?" He had hurried earlier, he just asked her a few words, and did not check it in person. She was probably frightened, stupid, never seen her self-examination, even if there was a wound, she could not find it herself. Yan shook his head, "I'm fine. There is blood on your clothes. There must be some injuries. Wait, there is a spare medicine for iron damage in the carriage." After speaking, he immediately climbed into the carriage. When Renai stared at her back, only to realize that she had a wound on her shoulder, and her red dress was scratched. The wound was exposed outside. It was not noticeable before, but now she can see very clearly. Yanj took out the spare medicine kit, but when Renai didn't pick it up. Instead, she squeezed her wrist and said, "Do you have any clothes? I'll wash it for you." On weekdays, he avoided his woman when changing clothes, but did not protest at the moment. When he was talking, she nodded. He was so smart that he looked at the distressed panic. He climbed into the carriage again, and not only took out her clothes, but also gave him a coat. Well, the woman secretly hid a lining belonging to him. Don't buy him some nice clothes, buy a thin lining, and the spare one has been kept by her all the time. Is this afraid that he will run away? After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 790. The water was a bit cold. The red skirt on her body was relatively thin. She took off a few straps and took off. There was no lining inside, only a small belly band. When Renai was busy helping her to wipe the blood on her body and deal with those wounds, and didn't pay attention to other places. The woman said that she was not injured. There were several injuries on her arm and back, even one on her leg. Those people probably wanted her intact, most of the time she cut her back with a knife. Therefore, except for the flesh wound on her shoulder, the wound was bruised everywhere. It's really strong, and now there's no pain in shouting. She was lying softly on his lap and let him do whatever he wanted. Waiting to help her clean up, he asked her, "Does it hurt?" Her tender white skin flesh flew out, and she felt panic when she looked at it. But she didn't answer. He looked down and realized that she was asleep. Frightened and exhausted, it is not easy to support till now. He helped her change clothes. When her fingers touched her white and tender skin, her heart gradually became a little hot. The morning sun fell on her, and her skin was already white, and it was reflected more and more like a layer of shining light. Gradually his eyes fell on her, and gradually, he could no longer move. I don't know why, I suddenly remembered the peony in the Queen Mother's house called Zhao Fan. When he was young, he liked to run into the Queen's yard and take down the leaves of the peony, especially when the peony was called Zhao Fan by the palace people, and his fingers were holding the pink and tender petals. Satisfaction. Now his fingers touched her, and he was lingering. He was afraid that he would make a red mark on her, and he was afraid to force it, but in his mind, he remembered the Zhao Fan who had become a petal on the ground. It was still she frowned and groaned in her sleep that he was shocked by his disability and looked down. The place where she had just been touched by his finger had turned pale red. This skin is really too delicate. He scrambled to help her dress her clothes and cleaned his wound again, knowing that this place could not stay long, so he continued on the road. When I was in a city, I watched Lang Zhon with her and took medicine again. About guilty. The next 2 days, when Renai was very diligent in what he did. He didn't have to call the nerd aloud, he had already prepared her clothes and porridge. Yan Ji looked at him curiously, don't you be scared by what happened on that day? Why are these days so abnormal? Who was scared? He didn't want to say that sometimes she seemed to have a nightmare at night, frowning tightly, and holding his arms or the meat on her waist tightly with her hands, and she was forced to give him the meat. Take the next piece. And when she clenched her fingers, he couldn't even pinch. Of course, he didn't dare to force too much, for fear of pinching her delicate fingers into 2 sections. He can pat her on the back to appease without a teacher, or hold her in her arms and touch her body over and over again to relax her. This is really kind of torture and pain. Partially he was the one who was tortured, and he was a guilty conscience every day, for fear she knew. Too shameful, he was waiting for her to hook him up. Chicken, I'm so stupid, that wood is hooking you all the way. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 791. She didn't take any action, so he obediently surrendered. When Renai felt ashamed of himself, he pretended to calmly and indifferently asked her, are you abnormal? Yan Ji nodded, counting with his fingers, you are more and more diligent. You used to be stunned and shouted you several times before you can do things, but they still can't do well. You've washed several, but you haven't washed one in the past few days, and you are working harder than before. When Renai was that stunned before? That was his reluctance. And the belly band, who knows that her belly band is so easy to tear, it can be torn in half if you wash it twice. At first, he suspected that she was wearing this belly band just to hang him. I haven't done it before, but now it's practice makes perfect when Renai considers himself a cold face, but the redness of the tip of his ear has sold him inside. Yan Ji tilted his head and stared at him, staring, blinking curiously and asking, wait, why are your ears so red? He had stretched out his hand and grabbed one of his ears. Well, why is it so hot? You are not sick, you said you were injured, let's take a few days off and go on the road, you have to listen. Now it's fine, you are sick, what can I do, I have not waited for the patient. Her red lips were moving all the time, like the red flowers fluttered by the wind, shaking and shaking. He didn't understand what she was talking about. The scalding of the tip of the ear has spread all over the body with the help of her fingers. He stared at her lips, her throat was dry, and her lips were dry. She felt that her lips seemed to be covered with sweet rain, and she wanted to bite up. Suddenly, her ears were so painful, but she gave a stubbornness without seeing him respond. Her soft, worrying cry also finally rang in his ear, don't be boring, nerd. See, you are all stupid, you've been so stupid, you can how to marry a daughter-in-law. He wanted to say that he was okay, but listening to her worrying words, his mouth said, it's a bit uncomfortable, but let's take a break and just rest. Where would she believe him? A floor was laid beside the carriage, let him lie down, and the towel was wet on his forehead. I don't know which small box he found a piece of honey and fed it into his mouth. This woman even secretly hid snacks. It's such a life and death that she still hides snacks behind him. He was ill and was ill with anger. Once the women who came to hook him up, one by one can't wait to take his heart out to him. But she'd better. After going all the way, she could hide snacks in a situation where he couldn't even see them. Not a qualified spy at all. He enjoyed the tenderness of her fingers touching his face from time to time. My heart was tickling and suddenly thinking. Wasn't she the spy who purposely approached him? Or, she did go to Xiangzi and saved him. Today's meals were fed to him in person. The meat slivers were roasted and dried on the carriage roof before, and the meals were cooked in a clay pot. Me was half familiar and almost choked him. But looking at the black bottom of the pot on her face, he couldn't get the slightest anger. Even his heart was soft, if not for the restraint, he really wanted to hold her in his arms. After a rest morning, he decided to leave. As she said herself, she would not wait. He suspected that she would be tossed to death after being waited for half a day. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 792. This lovely little girl was lucky enough to meet him. When Renai felt that it was he who had the patience to treat her like this. If other men were tortured by her, she would rather commit suicide than be a cow by her side. When Renai deliberately bypassed the town during this time, and did not rest in the inn, all sleeping in the wild. Because of this, most of the time, she can sleep with her at night. This sneaky feeling of doing bad things is not good at all, and he can be tortured to death every night. But he was addicted again. While the sky was not shining, he washed his blasphemy, and then sat on the chin, staring at the moon and contemplating. This gentleman, he is used to it, but nowadays, he really does not want to be any more. If he goes on like this, he will have to be hollowed out before he reaches Xiangzi. Before dawn, the blasphemy trousers were almost dry, and the belly band and clothes belonging to her were also dried. When Renai received her clothes and lit a fire, she could eat dry food to make up, but his stomach was not good enough to bear the dry food. So once he sleeps in the wild, cooking a fire is also his business, and it is all a mess. He really did not expect that one day he would fall to such a point. Just as he said, practice makes perfect, and now it gets smoother. After a few days and 15 days, she was in a state of trance all day. Such hot weather is an individual's wandering, but her wandering is not the same as usual. It was not the same as when she was frightened. Lying softly in the car, his face was red, he thought she had a fever, but the result was not there. When he ate, he picked her up and fed her. She seemed to have no bones. The whole person was nestled in his arms. He fed her a meal, and after a long time, she could not swallow it. I urged her a few times, and she was just stupid. She rubbed her head with his head, and turned his head impatiently. When Renayu, he touched the vein on her wrist. Are you sick? Wait, I'll take you to the doctor when I'm in town. Yan shook his head and stunned his chest again. I'm fine, it's too hot, and I want to go into the water. When Renayu guessed that she should have a heat stroke, he drove the carriage to a stream, put her in the water, and patiently opened the porridge in a bamboo tube to feed her. She didn't eat, her mouth narrowed tightly at first, he was forced tight, and he glared at him with long eyelashes and tears. This look really made him pitiful and pitiful, only to be able to coax her with patience. Although her face was pale, her beaked lips were red and bright, delicate and dripping. He was impatient, and then he bowed his head and fed her with meals. She was horrified, her wet eyes wide open at him, like a silly little cat. His heart was about to be choked into water. This woman. During this period of time, the princess's illness that she has been attacking all the time has really kept him in a violent state, but later, he himself did not know why. It was what she said and what he did. She didn't even refute, and even comforted herself. It was normal for her to be so pretty, and it saved him a life. Taking her to Xiangzi is not a problem. Now holding her in her arms like this, the throbbing heartbeat on her chest was even more unbearable somewhere. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 793. These days, Shaw thinks about her body, but she always sneaks around. Now holding her in his arms like this, is like spreading out in the sun, he can't bear it. It was as if the smell of was in the air, urging him not to hesitate any more, and to rush down. Her watery eyes seemed to be asking him silently. Instead of leaving her lips in time, he turned this feeding into a different kind of cricket little by little. He stared at her steamy eyes, his chest banging, and his heart seemed to jump out. Her mouth was warm, soft, wet, and sweet. His body also seemed to be soft and wet, only somewhere, it became iron bone, uncomfortable and painful. He ran his fingers into her clothes and easily grabbed her 2 little meat dumplings. In the corners of her eyes, tears gradually leaked out. The teardrop dangled his eyes. He froze, flashing light, and suddenly reacted to what he had done. How did he do this? It was also at this moment that he was shocked that he was patient with her princess disease, not because she was beautiful, but because he seemed to like her. I like her as well as her body. I like her, so I can't bear to be aggrieved, suffering, and tearful. The thought stunned him, and he panicked and let go of her lips. She was caught in a strong cough, and she wanted to stay away from her smelling jade. He saw her cough so uncomfortably, and rushed to find water to feed her again. It was about frightened by his Menglang's action. She soaked her lower body in the water and kept her eyes closed to ignore him. When Renai was scared by himself. Several times I wanted to speak and apologize to her, but my throat rolled and I couldn't say anything. At night, because it was about 15, the moon was particularly round and bright. He didn't dare let her soak in water for a long time, and took her back to the carriage early despite her objections. She was still nagging. He wanted to rush to the town to find a doctor, but she nestled in his arms. No matter how he coaxed, he would not let him go. This is really kind of intolerable torture. She hasn't given him a cure yet today. As soon as the moon came out, when Renai's abdomen began to tingle, he reached out to push her shoulders, and wanted to talk to her about antidote, but unexpectedly, her hand grabbed his wrist first, and pressed him with both hands, and she kissed his lips. She is rough. And it's very rusty, it's just like a roasted suckling pig. But she couldn't bear her tenderness, so holding him close to her was that she couldn't move any more, and he was eager to give up. Happy brother, what's wrong with you? Happy brother, if you do this again, I can't help it, you stay away from me. Happy brother, are you still awake? Do you know what you are doing? He could actually push her aside, but didn't want to move, and felt he had no energy to move. All his strength seemed to be condensed somewhere by her. She was faint in the clouds, just wanted her to hurry up a little faster. Yan Ji stopped moving, she squinted at him slightly. Just when Renai felt that she had restored her reasoning with a call, he was quite regretful that he had just destroyed the atmosphere of the broken cricket, but his face pretended to calmly push away. She was. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 794. Damn. Yan Ji's head lay down, and his lips pressed against Renai's lips. She squeezed his cheeks with both hands and murmured, I'm going to eat you. Is she going to eat him? Slap him like that just now? Or is it the way he wants to eat? Because of her soft words, the blood in his body seemed to boil. Feeling thirsty and uncomfortable, she just wished she was eaten immediately by her sweet and soft mouth. Are you okay? When Renai braced her shoulders with both hands, trying to keep a little distance from her, so that each of them was a bit sane, but his mute and seductive voice was like another invitation, happy brother, you. Before he finished speaking, he saw her lips open slightly, and her little tongue added thirst to her rosy lips. All the rumors of sanity are in powder. He took her into his arms, turned around, and stood on top. Whether she thinks about it or not, anyway, he thinks about it anyway. She said he was going to eat him, then he gave himself to him. Whether she will eat him or not, he doesn't know, but this night, he eats her all. This is her first time. The blood was stained on him and landed on the carriage. It was very dazzling, but it made him very happy, holding her in her arms, as if she had a unique treasure in the world. She couldn't touch it enough, and she didn't feel too close to herself. About swept the body, the pain in Wenrenai's abdomen was completely gone. He wanted to put up with it and give her a little time to relax. But she was like a little tortoise-shell cat that had opened up, and had been pestering him all the time, without any intention to stop. He's never been this crazy. No sense at all. Only by the instinct of her body, she undulated in her body. Later, until she was lethargic, he learned his reason later. She nestled in his arms, soft and small. He touched her with her hand, and then again and again. Such a soft body, not enough to touch. He felt a little contented. This is the true love of men and women. The joy is to the utmost, and the joy is to the utmost. After a little aftertaste, the sense of satisfaction will still spread throughout the body. To make him beautiful, he even wanted to spit a few fish bubbles. On the second day, the words awakened, and found that they were in the arms of Wenrenai. The man's body was like a stove, the sky was already hot, and it was really uncomfortable to be held by him. She reached out to poke him without saying a word. He already opened his eyes and looked at her with a serious and apologetic expression. Happy brother, although the two of us happened yesterday, you can rest assured that I will be responsible to you. He had been awake long ago, and had been thinking about how to talk to her. Countless words had been brewing. However, this open eye met her black and white eyes, and the words that he had uttered in his mouth were completely different. However, the meaning is the same, just the words lyric that he brewed. Yan Ji blinked his eyes and looked at him, asking curiously, "Will you marry me?" Wenrenai nodded immediately, "Yes, yes, I will marry you when we return to Beijing." Yan Ji bowed his head, as if he was shy. He rested his head on his chest and whispered, do you have a wife's room in my house? I won't make people small, and I won't help others. Very, my man, I can only have a woman in my life. Wenrenai, oops, I have a wife, I'll go back and take her off immediately. Later, Wenrenai still couldn't marry her. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 795. Wenrenai hugged Yanj tightly and wished to rub the softness into his arms with his laughing body. I will only have one wife in my life, rest assured, I will never lose you. Speaking of it, there is no scruples, and the two came again and again in the carriage, and then went to Zioxi to wash and continue on the road. Wenrenai thought that this pair was too embarrassing, which was not conducive to her and his long-term development, so when she was in another city, she earned a little money behind her, not only changing the carriage to a luxury carriage, but also when the mule was replaced by a horse. Naturally, the lining that had been worn out for a long time was replaced with new clothes. Yanj smiled and looked at him. Don, are you stealing the silver? He also gave her a pack of silver. She didn't seem to have any idea about the silver. She squinted and ignored it, just staring at him all the time. No, he said quickly, I just met an acquaintance, borrowed it. I thought you were doing bad things. Yan Ji leaned lazily on his shoulder, yawned, and said, I'll try the new mattress in the carriage and sleep well. You keep going, don't be lazy. Wenrenai was not lazy. Hurrying during the day and honing with her in the carriage at night. She used to think that her princess was very ill, and she was really arrogant. Now she can't wait for her to move her finger, and she has presented many treasures in front of her, just for her to call him good brother softly. Wenrenai also discovered for the first time that women are a terrible existence than poison. He seemed to be confused by her now. And willingly, can't wait to be confused by her. The carriage got bigger. He can also switch actions with her in the carriage. He even stared at her once while she was asleep. So lovely. He thought, how could he be so lucky to meet such a beautiful woman who looks good everywhere? He couldn't wait to enshrine her on his head, wherever he went. However, he wanted to hold her in his arms, only he saw her well and knew how wonderful she was. Every day he had a very sad heart, for fear that she would like other men. A woman like her, what to do if she wants to be hooked by a bad person with a heart? She was so lazy that she would not even be willing to resist. He was so anxious that he couldn't wait to stay with her every day. When she was in the carriage, she would still wear her appetite when she was uncomfortable, and then taught her little by little, and taught him to call his good brother, only in front of him alone. Whenever you meet another man, you can't take a closer look. She probably didn't understand why he didn't move and only shouted at the critical moment, pouting angrily, and ignored him. However, it didn't take long for her to be stunned by him, and she had to be subdued, begging him softly in his arms, following his words, and saying those words he loved to hear. He felt that he loved the little cute she had in his arms. So even if she shows his minions and pushes him into the carriage, he will cooperate with her and work with her to study various new poses to try. He first bought her some textbooks to relieve her boredom, and then all those textbooks became picture books that were not available on the market. Two people often look at it with interest, looking at it, and simulating on the ground in those poses. He felt that he had lived the life of the gods. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 796. There was not much dry food on the carriage, so when passing by a town, when Renai stopped the carriage on a rare day and went into the town to purchase necessities. Yanj couldn't sleep, and the man on the carriage was covered with layers of cloth. Even if it was very sunny in the daytime, he still couldn't get on the carriage. Leaning on the pillow, she looked at the picture books when Renai bought for her, while listening to the hustle and bustle of people outside. The paintings are really rough, so they smell interesting. She scoffed at her heart, and she sketched 2 strokes better than that. However, watching when Renai's technical progress in the development of the book quickly, she also looked at the book so high. The chicken said at this time, "Wood, is this mission almost completed?" The sound was miserable, as if I couldn't wait for a moment. Yanj also wanted to return to the green hat system space soon and enjoy the feeling of being comfortable in the eyes, which is green, so he answered, "It's coming soon." In this plane, the chicken has urged the song countless times. It really doesn't want to stay in the green hat space for every minute and every second. The child's sharp cry came into the ears of Yanj at this time. Yanji has a keen sense of hearing, and he heard people talking about it. This kind of unlucky monster, quickly kill it. Who dares to kill? What if it gets irritated by that time? Throw it. Throw it a few hundred miles away and it won't be found. Yanj lifted the curtain and looked at him, crying more than a baby full of scales, with 2 fleshy little on his head. Next to the baby, a woman knelt there and kept her head to the crowd, asking everyone to make way. Seeing the lively crowds have fenced off the child and the woman strictly, although they all scolded and grinned to kill the baby, they were afraid to be followed by evil spirits in the future, so they didn't dare to do it manually. There are too many people in the containment. If it weren't for Yanj to help the carriage stand up on the carriage, it would be the same. When Renai didn't expect that there would be so many people in the blink of an eye, and his heart sank, and his face was gloomy. Holding the daily necessities and striding over the crowd and walking to the carriage, I realized that these people are not surrounded by their own brothers, but surrounded by them, and I don't know what they are watching. He felt relieved at the bottom of his heart, and didn't bother about why those people were noisy. He put things in the carriage, and Molly's had to drive away. She likes to be quiet, so noisy she is definitely not used to it. Yanj opened the curtain and grabbed his sleeve. She said to Wen Renai, "Look what's going on." Wen Renai didn't want to worry about gossip, he just wanted to hurry to his destination. But looking down at Shang Yanj's wet eyes like begging eyes, his heart softened and he immediately responded. After responding, I immediately reacted and wanted to regret it, but looking at her immediately frowning eyes, his sermon swallowed in his mouth. There are so many injustices along the way, you must manage them when you encounter them. This dog can't go where she wants to go, and most of the so-called injustices are caused for a reason. So. But these words, he did not tell her, her clear eyes are completely free of impurities, he felt that such things, she still did not know well.